Good morning, everybody. I'm Jesse Weber, and welcome back to Law and Crime Live. This is where we cover some of the most interesting live trials in the country today. And as always, we're so happy to have our viewers with us from the Crime and Investigation channel. Thank you for joining us. Now, before I get into our main live trial of the day, I have to give a recap, an update, if you will, of a case that we have been covering here on Law and Crime. It is a case out of Texas. It's about a former Houston doctor named Leon Jacob. Now, everybody knows that a few days ago, he was found guilty of 2 counts of solicitation of capital murder for hiring a hitman to take out his ex-girlfriend and his new girlfriend's ex-husband. That's right. Unfortunately for him, this purported hitman was actually an undercover police officer. Now, yesterday on lawandcrime.com, we were covering the sentencing phase. And boy, did the jury come back with a sentence of life in prison. That's right. Not looking good for Mr. Jacob. You can go to lawandcrime.com to learn a little bit more about this case. But our focus today will be on our main live trial, the Claude Tex McIver case out of Atlanta. A prominent attorney who is on trial for the murder of his wife, Diane McIver, by shooting her from the back seat of a moving car. Now, his team is saying that this was all a tragic accident, that he didn't intentionally shoot Diane, that the gun just went off. What we saw yesterday was the continued press by the prosecution about the motive for this crime, the financial motive. We have a short recap right now to show you what happened yesterday in the court. Take a look.
Prosecutors say Tex McIver murdered his wife for financial reasons, but testimony on Monday raised questions about whether the state's theory is accurate. William Corey, who worked with victim Diane McIver, said she was planning to give her ranch to her godson, Austin.
She couldn't love him anymore. It was Austin owned the ranch as far as Diane was concerned.
However, when Diane McIver died, her will didn't say that. Prosecutors say Tex McIver kept canceling appointments to change the will.
He said that that was his biggest regret, was that they did not get around to updating their wills because that was something that she wanted.
Right. What did the defendant tell you about Austin receiving the ranch based on Diane's 2006 will? What did he tell you about that?
He said that the wills were made before Austin was born, so that he was not included in the will.
Right.
Is that proof of murder? It turns out Tex changed his own will to give godson Austin the ranch anyway, just like Diane McIver wanted.
He said that he had changed his will and that he knew this is what they both wanted, that they didn't get around to it, and that he wanted to make it right by her, or she wouldn't let him into heaven.
The change, of course, means Tex McIver gets the ranch between now and his own death. Prosecutors say the defendant's strange financial moves go beyond property.
I said, you ought to take it and put it in a safe deposit box. I was going to tell him, if he didn't want to, he didn't have anything to tell me, I was going to start telling him what I thought. I said, you ought to take all this jewelry and put it in a box, in a safe deposit box, and when Austin gets grown and gets married, I said, hell, just tell him to give whoever he affected with, engaged to, or what, give him one piece of it, and don't ever let it all go overboard. But you ought to tell him that. And when he gets old enough, because I didn't want all that expensive jewelry. I wanted Austin. Diane would have given it to Austin. Tex knew she would have given it to him, and so I just was trying to do what Diane would have liked to have done.
The defendant said nothing back. Prosecutors hope it's enough to convince the jury of the defendant's guilt. This is Rachel Stockman for the Law and Crime Network.
Our live trial coverage of this case will begin again today. I'm keeping a careful eye on the courtroom right now. As soon as it starts, we're going to go in there. But there's so much to dissect about what happened and try to make sense of this financial motive. So let me bring in my guest for this morning, criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor Bob Bianchi. Bob, it's great to have you back here on the program.
Great to be here, Jesse. Thank you.
All right, break it down for me, okay, will you? What did we learn yesterday about the financial reason for why Tex McIver would shoot and kill Diane McIver?
Well, let's start with what is most important to learn is how not to be prosecuting a case. Too many witnesses. When we were doing the rundown as to what was going on with these witnesses and the financial motive testimony, I had to say to myself, wait a minute, maybe I made a mistake. Are these the defense witnesses or are these the prosecutor's witnesses? When we first started talking about this case, Jesse, we said, wow, there's 100 witnesses that are expected to testify. I've tried homicide cases, death penalty cases, where I've called no more than 20 witnesses. Then to find out that they're calling these witnesses where the main issue as to why they charged purposeful murder is the financial motive, and they're getting testimony that's essentially saying it's all over the place, to be honest with you. And if anything, I'm reading it, is that he didn't have a problem with Austin having this home. He was just working out other details and significant financial transactions. And it seems like the prosecutor is all over the map in terms of putting these witnesses on in order to establish motive. Last point on this, Jesse, we talked about this. As a homicide prosecutor, if motive is in the case, and you got to have a motive. You got to show that the person was really agitated. That motive was significant enough that it would cause a person to kill. I don't even think the prosecution has a theory here.
Bob, I want to talk about that theory, but first I want to let our viewers know we have a live shot into the courtroom, okay? That's the live feed into the Tex McIver courtroom. That's Tex McIver, the defendant. Those are his attorneys, Don Samuel and Bruce Harvey. I want to just talk now, Bob, about this, okay? So we know that Diane and Tex shared a ranch. We know that Austin is Diane's godson. We know that she wanted to leave the ranch to him when she died. We know that Diane had a 2006 will in place, but it was before Austin was born. There was a disagreement among Diane and Tex about what would happen to her interest in the ranch, going to Tex. And when she died, Tex said to Ann Schwall he wanted to fulfill her wishes by leaving the ranch to Austin. He said the biggest regret is that they didn't change the will and that he was ultimately going to put Austin in his will, which is what he did. So now that he has the ranch, Bob, I'm getting overexcited. There's too much to talk about. Unfortunately, we do have to go to a break in a minute. So I do want Bob, we are going to talk about all these different details. And as soon as court begins, we're going to make sure to go into it. We know that a juror has been consistently late to court. That's why it's been held up and there's been a delay. But hopefully that won't be the case today. But if that is, Bob and I have so much to talk about. You don't want to miss anything. So we are going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we have a lot to talk about. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Law and Crime Live, everybody. And speaking of live, we are live in the Claude Tex McIver court. That is a live feed into this case. A prominent attorney who is charged with the murder of his wife, Diane. Now, Tex McIver, the defendant right there, is claiming that this was all a tragic accident, that the gun went off by itself in that moving car. He didn't mean to shoot his wife. We're going to talk about that case in a minute, and there's so much to talk about, including for what happened yesterday. But before we do, I want to preview for you right now a case that will begin tomorrow. It's a case out of Florida. It involves, unfortunately, another officer-involved shooting, again out of Florida. And this is the case of Newman Raja. And beginning tomorrow will be his Stand Your Ground hearing. We have a short preview of that case. Take a look.
A former police officer who shot and killed a stranded motorist claims it's a classic case of self-defense. He'll be making his case in a Stand Your Ground hearing this week in Palm Beach, Florida. Newman Raja is charged with manslaughter and attempted murder and the shooting death of Corey Jones, a beloved local musician. Jones was standing outside of his broken-down SUV on the phone with AT&T roadside assistance when the defendant approached him in an unmarked car in plain clothes. The defendant claimed in a 911 call the victim pointed a gun at him.
I came out, I saw him come out with a handgun, I gave him commands, I identified myself, and he turned, pointed the gun at me, started running, I shot him.
But prosecutors say the defendant's story isn't the whole truth. AT&T roadside assistance recorded the service call from Jones and showed the defendant may have lied.
And what's the name on it?
Corey Jones.
And what can I do for you tonight?
I need to get a tow. I'm
Okay.
broke down. Huh? I'm good. Yeah, I'm good. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. There's gunshots.
Raj's attorneys intend to use recent changes to Florida's controversial Stand Your Ground law, which requires the prosecution to prove it wasn't self-defense before the trial. I'm Rachel Stockman for Law and Crime.
Again, that's the Newman Raja case, a really disturbing case that we will be covering here on Law and Crime. But let's now focus on our live trial of the day. It is the Claude Tex McIver case. I want to bring in our very special guest again for this morning, criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor Bob Bianchi. Bob, this seems to be what I'm understanding the prosecution saying, that what we learned yesterday is Tex McIver killed Diane for financial motive, and here's why. He didn't want Austin, Diane's godson, to get the ranch. He made it very clear that while Diane was alive, they didn't have any way of giving the ranch to Austin. He didn't have Diane change her will. There was a dispute among them about him getting the interest to the ranch when she died. The prosecution also seems to be implying that he may have gotten rid of her second will, this mysterious second will that Diane had. And finally, what I think the prosecution was trying to say yesterday was that he sold her jewelry really quickly after she died, when we just heard from Billy Corey, who was her boss, that Diane, he said, I think you should put that jewelry in a safe deposit box for Austin. So in other words, if that's the prosecution's arguments, and you correct me if I'm wrong, are those strong?
I don't think they're strong because people are all over the place, and the prosecution witnesses are saying they were a loving couple. They had a great relationship with one another. Jesse, let's look at the bottom line, how to construct a case from a prosecutor's point of view. Motive does not have to be proven in a murder case, but certainly prosecutors love solid motive, but the motive's got to be solid. You can't have witnesses that you're calling onto the witness stand as a prosecutor who are giving you all sorts of conflicting information that actually is making it sound like I said to you. I had to read the notes again saying, are these defense witnesses or prosecution witnesses? And here's the other fatal flaw the prosecutor is making. They are putting the defendant's case on for them without the defendant having to testify. And not only are they doing that, because the prosecution is putting those very favorable defense witnesses on the witness stand, the defense attorney is now allowed to cross-examine them as opposed to using direct examination techniques, which gives the defense lawyers far more power to solicit even greater and better information on behalf of the defense. And what I used to do when I was training homicide prosecutors, like say, for example, when you have a confession or a statement where a defendant puts in their defense in the statement, if you can prove the case outside of the statement, don't put the statement into evidence, because then you will force the defendant to have to take the witness stand in order to present the defense. I know it sounds a little heady, but it's tactically very important. So here, to get back to your point about the motive issues with regard to these finances, the prosecutor wants to have solid A-plus witnesses to not only say there is a motive, lots of people have financial issues, but you want to be able to show that motive was so significant that it would cause somebody to kill, and these witnesses aren't doing that.
Not only that, a lot of these witnesses are not getting, the prosecution's not getting the testimony they were hoping for. You see, two witnesses from yesterday said Tex was distraught after Diane died. He was crying. You had one witness said, the prosecutor asked him, or asked her, was Tex verbally abused by Diane? No, it's not the answers that they were looking for. But, you know, Bob, let's hold off on 1 second. What I want to show our viewers, we're talking so much about the testimony from yesterday. Here is some of the testimony from Ann Schwal. Now, again, this is Austin, Diane, the victim, her godson. This is Austin's mother explaining this whole situation about the will. Let's listen in from yesterday.
There was only one 807 notice. Right, that was my... That's fine. Okay, I understand. Do you recall where you were when she told you that she wanted Austin to have the ranch?
I believe we were at the ranch.
Okay. After Diane's death, did you become aware that there was a will that was probated for Diane McIver from 2006?
I did.
Okay. And can you tell the jury, based on the information that you knew about the 2006 will of Diane McIver, was Austin named in the 2006 will to get the ranch? Let me see if I can lay a little foundation.
Okay.
First, if you could tell the judge, how do you know about the 2006 will?
I found out after her death.
Okay. Have you ever had the opportunity to actually see the 2006 will or a copy of it?
No.
Can you tell the jury, after the death of Diane McIver, did you have a conversation with the defendant about Diane's 2006 will?
I did.
Can you tell the jury when was the first time you would have had this conversation with him about Diane's 2006 will?
It was after her death.
I think a couple of days, a day, a week, a month?
It was a couple of days after.
Okay. And can you tell the jurors what did you say to him about Diane's 2006 will?
What did I say to him?
Mm-hmm. How did the conversation come up? It's probably a better question.
He told me that his biggest regret was that they did not get a chance to change their wills, update their wills.
And can you tell the jurors this was in regards to what?
Just after her death, there was just a lot of, I guess, business just, going on with the, what a funeral or planning and discussions, and he just said that to me when I was at the condo.
Okay. And did Austin come up in that conversation with respect to what Diane told you, which was she wanted Austin to have the ranch? Did you talk to the defendant about that?
I did. He said that that was his biggest regret, was that they did not get around to updating their wills because that was something that she wanted.
As we wait for our live coverage in the Claude Tex McIver courtroom, and again, we're keeping a careful eye on that, we're analyzing what happened yesterday in the case. Bob, you heard Ann Schwal. Tex said to her, our biggest regret is that we couldn't give the ranch. Why didn't he just give the ranch to Austin then? Isn't that suspicious? Just give it to him.
Well, there's multiple things here. Let's not forget that he's a 50% owner of that ranch as well. And there was an issue, and I don't want to get into too much heady stuff here about predeceasing and who are going to be issues and what if both of them die in a mutual accident or a catastrophic event. So there are lots of permutations in the will world, which I imagine the defense is going to bring out, that you've got to iron out, especially when you're dealing with such sizable property. But let me ask you, Jesse, what is this witness doing on the witness stand for the prosecution in this case? And where is the forensic evidence? Were they going to do that? Bury that in the middle?
That's the key. That's the key. That's what we're all waiting for. What happened in the car? And that really becomes the question. How was that gun fired? Really, isn't that the main question? Was the gun fired point blank range? What was the condition of the gun? These are the questions that we hope to have answered. We'll take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll talk more about this case. Welcome back, everybody. We're covering the live trial of Claude Tex McIver, a prominent Atlanta attorney who is on trial for the murder of his wife, Diane McIver, by shooting her from the back seat of a moving car. Now, that might seem like an open and shut case, except the defense is saying that this was all a tragic accident, that he did not intentionally shoot his wife. What we're talking about right now is we are waiting for the live feed in the courtroom, and I'm keeping a careful eye on there. As soon as it starts, we're going to make sure to go into it. We're talking about the financial motive that was brought in throughout this case, but there's some questions that I know I have, and I'm pretty sure the jury does as well. Again, I'm here with Bob Bianchi. Bob, what we talked about in the break and what we're going to talk about now is how the prosecution has really built up that motive. They want to start off with the motive angle of the case, and then they seem to get into forensics in the car. What do you think of that strategy?
Very poor strategy, and they're opening up the door for the defense to really hammer them down. It's all about primacy and recency, Jesse. That's why opening statements are so important, and the defense did a great job in opening statements. You're setting the tone. People are making decisions despite the fact they're not supposed to. We all know regular jurors, regular people do right from the beginning of the case. So when the state starts its case, it starts with motive. So I was thinking, wow, this must be a real doozy of a motive here. Solid proof, solidly shows somebody who would, in any circumstance, a reasonable person would have an idea of killing. And what do we have? We have all of these witnesses now. The motive is all over the place. Prosecution calling witnesses that actually help the defense in the case. And we haven't even gotten to what's most essential, which is the forensic. And the defense is going to say why they didn't get to the forensics, because they knew the forensics doesn't prove their case.
Well, maybe they think the strategy, they want the last thing for the jurors to have in their minds is the gunshot. And that might be the case. We do have a live feed in the courtroom. This is a 3-shot right now. We're waiting for the jurors to come in. Bob, quick question for you while I have you. We might have to cut out. So as soon as we have audio, we'll make sure to go into the courtroom. Here's my question for you, Bob. I'm going to ask you, what has been the strongest part of the prosecution's case so far? Has it been the idea that he didn't show a lot of remorse after the shooting? Is it the fact that they went to Emory Hospital when there were other hospitals that they should have gone to? Was it the fact that there was this loan that he had with his wife that was kind of strange? What do you think is the strongest piece of the case?
That a woman has a bullet in her back and she's dead.
Okay, well, there you go. You can't really argue that point. We all know he is the shooter, and that's really the point, right? Doesn't it all come down to how was the gun cocked? What mode was the gun in? We know the defense brought up the point that depending upon what mode of the gun was in, what kind of pressure was needed to pull that trigger? And so, I look at that, and Bob, and I'm not exactly sure. You tell me, is that what we're waiting for, the mode of the gun?
Well, I said this when we first started talking about this in the opening statement, having done a lot of ballistics trial testimony, there is not going to be a ballistics expert with any level of credibility when they can't determine whether or not it was in single action or double action, that is going to be able to tell you, especially when the bullet is shot, a singular bullet shot through the lower part of his seat, that this was somebody who was actually intending to shoot the person. There's not a credible ballistics expert that's going to be able to say it. And Jesse, that's why I think they went so strong with motive in the beginning of this case, because they know the defense attorneys are going to have a field day. And by the way, these defense attorneys, in my humble opinion, are outmatching the prosecutors at all aspects. This is going to be a not guilty or hung jury, in my humble opinion.
Well, in your humble opinion, you might be right. You are watching a live feed into the courtroom. As soon as it starts, we'll make sure to go to it. But Bob, okay, actually, we do have audio in the courtroom, so let's turn to it live now.
That can frustrate someone else. So it was a long way of saying it wasn't an issue that Mr. Winston did not. And we will proceed. Mr. Rucker, state's next witness.
State to call Mr. Kenneth Rickert. Please stand.
Do you swear and affirm that the testimony you should give the court today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Yes, sir. If you will, have a seat. Get as close to the mic as you can during your testimony. For the purposes of the court's record, please state and spell your name.
Kenneth Rickert, Kennethrickert.
And good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Would you please turn and introduce yourself to the jurors? It's okay if you look at them when you give your testimony. And tell them your name and how you are currently employed.
Kenneth Rickert. I am currently employed as General Counsel for U.S. Enterprises.
And can you explain to the jurors what are some of your duties and responsibilities as General Counsel?
I'm responsible for all the legal issues that come up with the company. We get involved in anything from general contract work to aviation. We have a corporate jet. We deal with real estate law, compliance issues, anything that comes up in a small company, litigation.
Okay. And can you tell the jurors how long have you been employed at U.S. Enterprises as General Counsel?
I have been there for 26 years.
Okay. And could you share with them a little bit about your educational background that allows you to perform your duties there as General Counsel?
I graduated from the University of Virginia with a BA in economics and received my law degree at Emory University.
Okay, so this is Kenneth Rickard. He was the general counsel of the company where Diane worked. Bob, quick question for you before we go back into his testimony. You talk so much about the fact that he might not be found guilty, Tex might not be found guilty of murder, but he still faces those 3 influencing witnesses charges. Those are strong charges. Do you think he might be found guilty of those so far, based upon what we've heard?
Those are definitely stronger charges, and it also provides the psychological distance, if you will, that a jury can come back and say, listen, we don't think that this is an actual murder, but we do believe that he attempted to influence witnesses. You know, sometimes jurors have that sensibility that, well, they don't want this guy to get off just scot-free for everything here. And there is, in fact, evidence there that would support those charges far greater than the evidence presented so far in the murder case.
Yeah, well, as with everything in this case, we'll have to wait and see. Let's listen in live.
Very good. I think we had a respect for each other. We had worked together for 24 years, and Diane was difficult. She was a tough taskmaster. She demanded a lot, but we had a mutual admiration.
How would you describe her as a businesswoman?
Tough. She was very astute, very street smart. She was a hard-working individual, and she achieved a lot in her life. When Diane married Tex, we got involved in litigation. It was very complex and protracted litigation against the city of Atlanta and Clear Channel. It went on for probably close to 10 years. And during that 10 years, we had numerous firms that represented us. Fisher and Phillips probably took the lead in that. In many instances, they didn't do the actual trial in federal court. They were not lead counsel, but they were very much involved throughout the litigation. And I'd say probably over the 10 years of that litigation, we spent over $10 million in legal fees. It was very expensive. We were successful in obtaining a judgment in a federal, I don't know whether this is more than you need to know, but...
Well, yeah, I'll stop you right there.
Okay.
But the gist of it is, because of the work that Mr. Phillips did while Mr. McIver was a partner there, generated roughly $10 million in fees.
And that's just a guess, but it was significant.
Okay. Now, can you share with the jurors, in your capacity as an attorney there at U.S. Enterprises, from time to time would Diane McIver ask you to perhaps do legal things for her personally or any of her various businesses?
On occasion.
Okay. And I want to draw your attention to, well, strike that. Let me ask you another question. Did you know Diane to make loans to people?
Yes.
Okay. And can you describe for the jury what you knew about Diane McIver making loans to people?
She was generous. If her friends needed money, she would help them and make loans to them, various amounts over the years. She'd ask me to prepare a promissory note, and I would do that. She'd give me the parameters, the interest rate, how long, whether it was principal and interest, that type of thing. Okay. And I would prepare the document, and she, I assume, made the loan.
Okay. With respect to the loan she'd make to her friends,
You're watching a live feed in the Claude Tex McIver courtroom. That's Kenneth Rickard, the general counsel of the company where Diane McIver, the victim, worked. Now he's getting into his relationship with Diane. We know that he did some legal work for her, and we're getting into those loans that she made to friends. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back in a minute, and we'll go straight to the courtroom. Welcome back to Law and Crime Live, everybody. We are covering the Claude Tex McIver case out of Atlanta, a prominent attorney who's on trial for the murder of his wife, Diane McIver. Kenneth Rickard's on the stand right now. He's the general counsel of the company where Diane worked, and what he's talking about right now are the loans that Diane had made to Tex McIver. We're talking about a $750,000 loan right now, a promissory note that would be secured by the loan. They're going into the language of this right now. Let's listen in, and then we'll talk a little bit about it.
For value received, the undersigned Claude L. McIver III, hereinafter referred to as Maker, promises to pay to the order of Diane Smith.
Slow down, just a little bit for the jurors.
Reporter.
He's going to read that whole paragraph?
Well, just one paragraph, Judge.
Okay.
All right, I'll start over.
All right, let's talk a little bit more about this. I'm with Bob Bianchi this morning. Bob, we're looking at this. Why does it matter for the jury in terms of this promissory note that was helped secure the loan? Why does it matter that Diane loaned Tex money? That's an incentive to kill someone?
I think the question answers the question. What are we doing here? What is happening? How much more of this minutia that is going to take up the bandwidth of the jury that they're just going to start going, oh, hum, at a certain point in time? We get it. There was money. There was a separate funds with each of them. There was some dispute over a will. But you still haven't told me whether that was sufficient enough murder to kill, and the forensics to show me that it was not an accident, but was rather a murder. And if I were a defense attorney at the end of the day, I would be making like, wow, folks, tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock in this case till we got to anything relevant.
Okay, well, what about the fact that Kenneth Ricker just testified a little earlier, and we've heard other witnesses say this, that Diane McIver could be difficult. She could be a shrewd businesswoman, and she could not be nice at times. And we know that she picked on Tex about his weight. What does that do for the jury?
I mean, you know, this is like, unfortunately, unless you have the pristine marriage created by the above, in which everybody is without fault or without sin, every marriage has problems. Every marriage has an aggressive one, an alpha, and a beta. I mean, if they were to crawl into your life, Jesse, or crawl into mine, as I did as a prosecutor.
Don't crawl into my life.
Yeah, in the lives of many people, we have to be very careful that we don't torture the little boogie-boos and blemishes that we have in order to distort them and to say that this was actually a motive to kill somebody. And I think that the prosecution is doing themselves a huge disservice by continually doing this and boring the jury. This is not a trial by motive. It's a trial by evidence.
Well, they might have a plan here, so let's listen in carefully. They might be trying to prove something else. Let's listen in live to the courtroom.
And you recognize that signature?
Yes, that's Tex, Claude McIver, Tex.
Okay. And over the years, you have done work with Mr. McIver, his capacity as a lawyer, Bishop Phillips.
I have.
And did you come to a place where you have seen his handwriting and his signature on other occasions?
Absolutely. I mean, he's sent me thank you notes from time to time. He's very gentlemanly in that, but he sent me thank you notes, and I know his writing.
You know his writing, okay. And this is what you told us is dated December 23rd, 2011, for $350,000, note secured by real estate. Is that correct?
Yes.
And can you tell the jury, without reading the whole first paragraph, what real estate was this note secured by?
This was a loan that she made to Tex, and it was secured by a security deed out on the property in Putnam County. Tex had made all the interest payments, but the note was due. He could not pay the $350,000 off at that point in time. He went.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, the prosecution is really trying to press that financial motive here about why Tex McIver would have shot and killed his wife, Diane McIver. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, there's so much to discuss. Stay tuned. We'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to Law and Crime Live, everybody. So we are keeping a very careful eye right now on the Claude Tex McIver courtroom. That's a live feed. Kenneth Ricker, a witness, is on the stand right now. Again, it's a case about a man who is charged with murdering his wife. The state says that he intentionally shot her. The defense is saying it was a tragic accident. And what they're going into right now is that financial motive. You keep hearing the prosecution really pressing that motive. And that is what the beginning part of their case has been. Witness after witness after witness, trying to show that Tex McIver, the defendant, really wanted his wife dead for financial gain. So we are going to keep a very careful eye on that courtroom. But we would be remiss if we didn't talk to you about a huge case that we've been covering here on Law and Crime. I mentioned it earlier today. It's rare that you get a gem like this, a gem where the facts are so unique, so interesting, that you have to talk about it. And not just that, the defendant himself was a character in and of himself. Now, this guy took the stand in his own defense. We're talking about the Leon Jacob case. This Houston doctor, I should say former Houston doctor, who was found guilty of 2 counts of solicitation of capital murder. This happened a few days ago. And he was found guilty for hiring a hitman to take out his ex-girlfriend and his new girlfriend's ex-husband. Process that for a second, okay? Because not only that, this hitman that he tried to hire was an undercover police officer. You can try to see how this happened. Well, last night we had a bombshell in the courtroom during the sentencing phase. We talked about it earlier. This case was so unique, and it really captured the nation's attention. I will have a short recap right now of this case in its entirety, and then we are going to talk about this case because you really do not want to miss anything from it. Here's a short recap about the Leon Jacob case.
The sentencing phase began this week in the trial of Leon Jacob. Jacob was found guilty of 2 counts of solicitation of capital murder last week and faces the possibility of life in prison. Jacob and girlfriend Valerie McDaniel were arrested last March after they tried to hire a hitman to kill their former lovers, but the hitman turned out to be an undercover officer. Daniel shortly after her arrest. Prosecutor.
This Leon Jacob case, unbelievable. Again, I'm here with Bob Bianchi. Now, Bob, we're going to play when this man decided to take the stand in his own defense. Not a great idea in a lot of ways because we know he was found guilty and he was sentenced last night in a really, really brutal fashion to life in prison. Bob, what happens when a defendant takes the stand?
Oh my gosh, I'm thinking about, you get me excited thinking about those times as a prosecutor. You never know what the defendant's going to take the stand, but especially a guy like this, the hubris, the arrogance. You know that he thinks he's going to be the smartest guy in the room, and you're wondering, please, Lord, let him take the stand. And then, of course, he gets on that stand. And for a prosecutor, when you're ready to jump into that cross-examination, you couldn't find a better guy from central casting to make himself look terrible in front of the jury, arrogant. And, you know, more importantly, my mentor always told me as a homicide prosecutor, and I believe it to be true, jurors love nothing better than to convict a defendant out of the words of his own mouth on the witness stand. Not only did he seal his fate in the guilt phase, he sealed his fate in terms of the penalty phase of this. His lawyer was looking for probation in the case, but in a dramatic testimony that he gave in this such interesting case, ultimately he gets a life sentence. You gotta love this guy on the witness stand.
We'll talk about this one. We have to. It's so amazing. But let's, we have a live feed again back in the Tex McIver courtroom. Kenneth Rickert. He is the general counsel of the company where Diane McIver worked. And again, what the prosecution is trying to get from this witness is financial motive. Why did Tex kill Diane? Now, the prosecution is having this witness on to talk a little bit about the loan. It is a little strange for a wife to have a really official loan to her husband. It was secured by a promissory note. Is that an incentive for a husband to kill his wife? Maybe. Let's listen in live to this testimony.
Plan to decide would she have to change her ownership interest in any way, if you recall. And if you don't, it's okay.
To accomplish what Diane wanted to accomplish, which was to give her interest in the ranch.
I'm sorry. Are we about to talk about what Diane wanted to accomplish with the changes to her will? Because if we are, then I object. I think the question was to do the tax planning Mr. McIver wanted to do, would there have to be changes to Diane's ownership of the ranch?
Right, that's correct. And not about the will. I didn't think it had gone into the area, but let's make sure it does.
Okay. Yeah. You understand my question, Mr. Rickert?
I believe you're asking if the deed itself would have to be changed.
Yes.
Yes, it would have been advisable to change the ownership, in my opinion.
Okay. And so, let me make sure I understand. You were presented with a tax plan by Mr. Hudson, correct? At this meeting,
there was one document. It wasn't a tax plan. There was one document that it was a tax planning vehicle, and we talked about changes to the will, but there was never a meeting of the minds between Diane and Tex.
Okay. Okay. And your advice to Ms. McIver at that time with respect to the tax plan was what?
I saw no benefit for her, so I did not recommend that she enter into that agreement. It was a lease agreement.
Okay. Now, do you know if she created a new will in 2014 and 2015? Do you know?
I do not know.
And you yourself personally never prepared one for her?
I prepared a codicil, which is an amendment to a will, back in 2007. That's the last document that I had prepared in connection with our estate planning.
Okay. Let me show you State's Exhibit number 447. I've previously shown it to the defense counsel. Take a look at that document and tell us whether or not you recognize and can identify it.
Yes, this is the codicil that I prepared in August of 2007, which would have...
Financial motive, financial motive, financial motive. That's what we're talking about here on the Claude Tex McIver case. The prosecution is really pressing the point that Tex McIver had an incentive to kill his wife, Diane McIver, by shooting her from the back seat of a moving car. Again, I'm here with Bob Bianchi. We're talking about that incentive. We're talking about the motive. I'm not so convinced yet, and I know you're not, Bob.
I want to go back to this piece. Like, first of all, let's talk about trial strategy. I love watching your commentators that are blogging, and there's one statement that really resonated with me. Regardless of the truth of a matter or wins or losses, if you lose the jury, you lose the case. That was one of the comments I'm quoting from one of your fans here on this network. And that is really, really true. How much more are we going to go into the minutia of this? Now, here's the other thing, Jesse. I'm thinking about my own life. If I ever wound up dead under suspicious circumstances at the hand of my wife, maybe
we'd cover it on Law and Crime. Next question,
on Law and
Bob.
Crime, yeah. But maybe it was because of my insurance policy. Maybe it was collecting insurance money. Or maybe if something happened to my wife, it's to collect her insurance money. Or maybe it's because we have wills and there are some things bequeathed differently. I mean, people have complex financial transactions, and you just cannot attribute everything to a motive of finances. Now, why did they do it here? Remember, initially they called this an accident. Then they converted it over to it as a murder case for two principal reasons in my mind. One, the financial issues that were at play, and secondly, because he did some things that would appear as if he was trying to deceive law enforcement with regard to his activities. But the bottom line is still going to get to, can the state prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he intended to kill her when he fired that singular round into the chair? And all this bootstrapping with financial motive, in my opinion, when you talk about proving a case to 12 jurors beyond a reasonable doubt, I think ultimately all this is going to add up to them saying, I don't know, maybe, maybe not. I don't think it really proves anything. Let's get to the forensics.
Because in other words, if the forensics were so strong that you could show he had an outstretched arm, that he pulled the weapon, that there was only one way that he could have done this, they wouldn't bother with the motive. Am I understanding that correctly?
And this is exactly what the defense is going to say, just as you said it. And then they're going to sit there and say, you know why they did that, ladies and gentlemen of the jury? Well, let me explain to you. At least this is what I would be saying, and I'm sure they will too. Because they had a gun in a bag, in a console, in the front seat, with the best friend driving the vehicle, where they went off the road while he was sleeping. She's the one who handed the gun to him. She's the one that says in the hospital that it was an accident. It's a single round shot in a downward fashion. That's not the manner in which you do it. And so, of course, ladies and gentlemen, the state has to sit there and batter you over the head with 30 witnesses to talk about financial motive. By the way, most of whom told you they have a great relationship and that they have a loving relationship. Right. Were you saying, ladies and gentlemen, were you scratching your head saying to yourselves, is this a prosecution witness or is this a defense witness? I just don't get the construction of this case.
Right. They've been going many different ways with this motive. We have a live feed again in the courtroom. Let's listen in live to this witness.
I do. They're James Hughes' children.
Okay.
And I'm not go ahead.
No. You know them to be James Hughes' children?
I know them. The last names may be different, but I know them as James. I've met both of them.
Okay. And when you say the last names might be different, what do you mean?
There was a document that was in the file that had a circle around each of those names, and it had not correct name.
Okay.
So I'm not sure.
Okay. And this was in 2007, correct?
This document was 2007, yes.
Right. Do you know how old Tiffany Hugh and Devin Hugh were at that time? Do you know?
Probably high school.
Okay. And certainly since this time, you don't know whether or not either one of them have gotten married?
I had no idea.
Okay. And this part here, It says the trustee's judgment to provide for the post-high school education of Tiffany Hugh, Devin Hugh, and Austin Schwab. Post-high school education includes college or postgraduate schools, professional schools, and any trade schools which Tiffany Hugh and or Devin Hugh and or Austin Schwab wish to attend. Right?
That's correct.
This was the change that she made to her 2006 will.
That was one of the changes she wanted to make.
And can you tell the jury in reviewing the document, does Diane McIver in this codicil assign her interest in the ranch in Putnam County to Austin Schwab in 2007 in this codicil?
No.
And did she sign this codicil?
No, it was never executed to my knowledge.
Welcome back to Law and Crime Live, everybody. You're looking at a live feed into the Tex McIver courtroom out of Atlanta, a prominent attorney who's on trial for the murder of his wife. And what the prosecution has been doing this past few weeks, we're in day 11 of this trial, is they're really trying to establish the financial motive for why he would shoot and kill his wife. And right now, they're discussing the Diane McIver, the victim's will. We're going to keep a very close eye on this courtroom. As soon as something happens, we're going to jump back in. That's why we didn't jump out earlier. We really want you to pay attention to that case. But we have to talk about a different case right now. It's a case that captured the nation's attention. It was all in the headlines. We covered it here on Law and Crime. It's an absolutely incredible case from Texas. I talked about it earlier. It's the case of Leon Jacob, a former Houston doctor who was found guilty of 2 counts of solicitation of capital murder for hiring a hitman to not only take out his ex-girlfriend, but his new girlfriend's ex-husband. I can't make this stuff up, ladies and gentlemen. And for Mr. Jacob, it didn't end up so well because that hitman was an undercover police officer. So he was found guilty. And yesterday, there was a bombshell sentence by the jury. It was unbelievable to watch. They sentenced him to life in prison. We have a short preview, recap of that entire case. Take a look.
The sentencing phase began this week in the trial of Leon Jacob. Jacob was found guilty of 2 counts of solicitation of capital murder last week and faces the possibility of life in prison. Jacob and girlfriend Valerie McDaniel were arrested last March after they tried to hire a hitman to kill their former lovers, but the hitman turned out to be an undercover police officer. McDaniel killed herself shortly after her arrest. Prosecutors played audio recordings of calls placed by Jacob while in jail, including conversations with his mother.
Had you listened to me back in February, you wouldn't have been there at all. But you only have to do it your way. But you, Leon, it's always been this way with you. You've got this big mouth, and you don't know when to shut it. You know, what I told you is what you've been charged with is worse than if you had actually done it yourself.
As well as recordings of Jacob bragging about his ability to sleep with a reporter.
So that reporter on ABC 13, Caitlin, she was up there to see me every day. Yeah, she wanted to sleep with me. She's really hot, actually. I mean, I know my wife's dead and I have to mourn her, but this one's cute.
Darren Gooden testified how Jacob had an affair with his wife and then threatened his safety.
I had some restraining orders I had to put in place. Following us around, sitting in front of the house, type deal. A couple of threats. He threatened us, threatened to blow up my house, threatened to kill me.
Megan Veracos, one of the targets of the failed murder-for-hire plot, testified again about the abuse Jacob inflicted upon her.
And did he put his hand on your mouth?
Yes.
Did it hurt?
Yes.
Did it leave a mark?
Yes. I went to my vehicle, and at that point, he followed me outside. Our dog also followed me. The dog jumped in the car. At that point, I'd locked my doors and tried to back out, and he told me if I didn't give him the dog that he would punch the window in, and he kept slamming his fist against the driver's side window and pulling on the car handle.
Jacob's ex-wife, Annie Morrison, testified about the volatile nature of their relationship and how Jacob pulled a knife on her at one point and also threatened her.
I don't recall what the fight was about. I recall we were in our apartment and he pulled out a pocket knife, is how I would describe it, where the blade flipped out. and he held it up. I don't recall what he said, but I recall feeling threatened by it and that he was threatening me with the knife.
The jury sentenced Leon Jacob to life in prison. This is Aaron Keller for the Law and Crime Network.
Just unbelievable. Just unbelievable. Bob, this guy's just so irresistible. Look at him. Every woman wants to be with him. What was about this case that made it so unique that everybody was following it and watching it every day?
Because he was the Austin Powers of doctors. I mean, you know, everybody wants to emulate the guy. I mean, really, it's a prosecutor's dream of hubris, arrogance, an individual that thinks he's better than everybody else. And here he is being charged with solicitation for murder. By the way, great investigation by law enforcement. And he's talking about how hot a reporter is and, quote unquote, I know that I should be mourning my wife, but, you know, she wants to sleep with me. So this is the kind of guy that just has no conscience. And, you know, in my career in homicide, which I've been doing since I've been trying homicide cases since 1996 all the way to the present, mainly as a prosecutor, a couple as a defense lawyer. And there are a few characters that stand out as being sociopathic, narcissistic people that, if given an opportunity, could potentially commit another crime. This guy strikes me as being one of those people.
Well, he's going to be in prison for the rest of his life. Did you find it interesting, though, I mean, unique in the perspective of the police investigation, they staged a kidnapping.
Yeah.
They actually took his ex-girlfriend and staged kidnapping photos and murder photos. Is that something that's commonly done in these kinds of cases?
It's not common in these cases, but it is a very good investigative technique in order to, you want to continue to show law enforcement that the quote-unquote agreement is being carried out and executed, that there's not a renunciation of purpose. That's often a defense. I didn't mean to do it, but if I did mean to do it, I renounced doing it. So it just kept locking and sewing the case in more and more. As a prosecutor, I would get agitated with law enforcement and sometimes would leave a couple of stitches loose so that the defense attorney could bust into it. But by doing these kind of things, they gave themselves an air-solid case and, may I add, made sure that they went for the life sentence to the jury, because this is conduct that a jury is going to look at and say, wow, what a jerk.
Right. Well, that's one word to describe him. These murder-for-hire plots are happening more and more. It's interesting to see this happen.
And for why they're happening,
yeah.
Jesse, in my experience. And you're right. It's easy to do with the internet, which is really scary. But sometimes it's for such bogus reasons. And the mother said it best. I love the mom. You know what? It's worse than having done it yourself. And there's some truth to that you didn't even have the courage to do it yourself, but hire somebody else to do it for you. And by the way, if you decide to do it that way, you are opening yourself up, because law enforcement is all over the internet interdicting in these cases.
Real quick, did he have any shot? Any shot. We are going to play his testimony in its entirety after the break, but did he have any shot of trying to show he didn't want her dead?
Let's give some kudos and sympathy and prayers to the defense attorney in this case, because I watched him interview after the guilty verdict, and he was seeking probation in the sentencing, and I almost laughed right onto my computer, spit onto my computer when I heard it. But that's what a defense lawyer's got to do.
I know. Bob, stand by. So again, we are keeping a very careful eye in the Atlanta courtroom for Claude Tex McIver. As soon as something happens in that courtroom, we are going to jump right back to it. But after this short commercial break, we are going in to the Leon Jacob testimony when he took the stand in his own defense. And you do not want to miss it. This guy is a character. You do not want to miss it. We'll take a quick break. When we come back, there's a lot to discuss. Stay tuned.
Now,
can I retract my last statement? It was not a continuous relationship. We had an interlude in 2014, and then there was a long break where we were just friends. And then, you know, after I broke up with my former girlfriend, we rekindled the romantic part of the relationship.
and your former girlfriend was who?
A woman by the name of Megan Louise Veracus.
All right. And you've heard Megan testify in this court?
I have.
All right. Now, tell the ladies and gentlemen of this jury about your relationship with Megan. When did you start?
We met during my divorce proceedings. I lived in a couple of hotels in Pittsburgh. I lived in the Wyndham Grand for quite some time, and I decided to move hotels, and I was given a referral to a place called the Cambria Suites, which is right next to the Console Center where the Penguins play, and I checked in there, I think, in the beginning of 2014, sometime in early January, and I met Megan there.
That's Leon Jacob, ladies and gentlemen, the doctor, well, former doctor, who was convicted and sentenced last night to life in prison for 2 counts of solicitation of capital murder. That's right, he tried to hire a hitman to kill his ex-girlfriend, as well as his new girlfriend's, or common law wife's, ex-husband. It's really, really an interesting love triangle. I guess that's one way to put it. But that is not the only case that we're covering here. I want to let our viewers know that we are keeping a very, very careful eye on the Claude Tex McIver courtroom. We do have a live feed in that courtroom. Again, the same witness, Kenneth Rickard, still on the stand. Nothing's really changed. What the prosecution is still trying to show is that financial motive. Why would Claude Tex McIver, this prominent attorney, kill his wife? Did he have a financial motive? Did he serve some sort of financial gain? Was he trying to make sure that she wouldn't cut him out of her new will? Those are all the questions that are trying to be put forward to the jury when the prosecution is handling their case. As soon as something happens, we'll make sure to go to it, but we are keeping a very careful eye on that live feed. Let's bring in again Bob Bianchi. Bob, we're talking about the Leon Jacob case. Such a unique case. We're watching him on the stand. How would you describe his demeanor? I know later on in his testimony, and we're going to show his testimony in its entirety, he seems to try to explain certain questions away. And he even said, I think at one point, how should I say this? He said it under his breath, and the jury heard that. What was his demeanor like in your eyes?
In 2 words, not good. In 1 word, obtuse. He just seems, as the evidence would show in this case, a calculated, manipulative person. He's demonstrating that on the witness stand. Calculating, manipulative, how do I answer that question? He doesn't come off good. Let's not forget, too, there's a whole plethora of testimony from other witnesses that have dealt with physical abuse, him zip-tying people and beating them in the past.
Holding them at knife point.
Holding them at knife point with a box cutter with their arms pinned down, threatening to kill parents.
So what did he need to do? If you were his defense attorney and you said, look, you're going on the stand, you're not only going to be in front of the eyes of the jury, which is the most important thing, but in a way, you're also in the front of the eyes of everybody in the courtroom. How does he have to perform? What should he have done?
You know, this is the thing. When you put a witness on the stand, whether you're a prosecutor or a defense lawyer, you dance with the one you brought. I mean, you can't change how a person's going to answer questions or who they are as people to a large degree. You can dress them up in different clothes, but typically under cross-examination or the examination, heat of the court and pressure of the moment, their personality is going to pop out. So you try to tell them how to answer the questions in a way that's truthful and honest and certainly would lend itself to a defense. I don't think when you're dealing with the difference between a probationary sentence and a life sentence, getting a guy to get up there that's obtuse and arrogant and the jury comes off as just not being a sympathetic guy helped them either in the guilt phase of the case and, as we know, certainly didn't help him in the sentencing phase.
Do you think the fact that he was a doctor, he was a professional, that hurt him in a way? Here's a guy who's so smart. You're really going to be manipulated by this hitman? I mean, you knew what was going on. If he was an uneducated person, somebody who maybe could have been in the position to be manipulated, I think that might have hurt him being such a doctor and a professional in a way.
I don't think it hurts him in front of a jury unless he comes off to the jury as if I'm the smartest guy in the room, which happens a lot with doctors, lawyers, and Indian chiefs. They come off as if everything they say is sacrosanct. I'm better than you. That definitely comes off the jury, comes off with respect to him. But ultimately, what's bothersome to them is the cold, calculated, plotted way in which he decided to execute 2 people without much remorse.
Unbelievable. Yeah. Unbelievable even describing the facts of this case. So as we keep a close eye on the Claude Tex McIver courtroom, we are going to come back and discuss more of the Leon Jacob case. We are going back into his testimony. This is just the beginning, ladies and gentlemen. You do not want to miss what happens when he gets back on cross-examination. He gets torn to shreds. We'll be back in a minute. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Law and Crime Live, everybody. So we have a live feed in the Claude Tex McIver courtroom, a prominent attorney who was charged, who is on trial for the murder of his wife, Diane McIver. This witness, Kenneth Rickard's been on the stand for a while now. Again, what the prosecution is trying to press is this financial gain, this financial motive that Tex might have had in killing Diane. And what he's basically testifying to is in the days after Diane's death, Tex was very interested in what he could get from Diane. Could he collect her Social Security benefits? It was even a question about her 401k. And then there was a question, he even said, I was expecting him to be more remorseful, and he was not. We're going to keep a careful eye on that court. As soon as something happens, we'll jump back into it. But our focus right now is on a different case. It's on the Leon Jacob case out of Texas. It just concluded last night. We've been recapping it because of how unbelievable the facts are. A former Houston doctor who was found guilty of, and this is, I want you to listen very carefully here, 2 counts of solicitation of capital murder. And this is unbelievable when you hear it from a doctor. He tried to hire a hitman to not only kill his ex-girlfriend, but his new girlfriend's former lover. Unbelievable. What we're playing for you right now is the testimony that he gave. He went on the stand. He went on the stand and tried to defend himself. Let's show you some more of that testimony from the other day.
Tell the ladies and gentlemen of this jury about Mac McDaniel. Had you ever met him?
I met him a couple of times when he lived next door to my mother. I think once when I came down to visit, and then once when I moved down here. I stayed with my mother for, I removed back to Houston in 2014. I stayed with my mother for a couple of weeks, maybe 3 or 4 weeks, actually, more like a month. And I had run into him a couple of times on the street. No real interactions, just a friendly hi neighbor, kind of thing.
So you didn't socialize with him?
Absolutely not.
And you didn't go to his employment or vice versa?
No, I knew nothing about him.
I'm sorry?
At the time, I knew nothing about him except for he was supposedly Valerie's husband, although he seemed to never be around very much. The few times I did see him, he drove into the house and would leave shortly thereafter.
Okay. And was he married at the time?
To Valerie, yes.
Okay. Now, tell the ladies and gentlemen of this jury about the the initial split that you had with Megan.
It's lucky when you have a gem of a case like this where this character of a defendant took the stand in his own defense. We're going to keep playing that for you today, but before we do, I want to let our viewers know we are carefully monitoring the Claude Tex McIver case. As soon as something happens more in that case, we'll make sure to go back to our live feed. In the meantime, I want to conclude my day, unfortunately, with Bob Bianchi. It was great having you on here. Bob, final thoughts here on the Claude Tex McIver case as we carefully monitor it.
Interesting to me, and just a mental note that I made, that they're making a lot about him asking about her Social Security benefits and whether he can get them. You think before you'd murder your wife in a car with her friend in there and ask your wife to hand the gun back to you, if this was in fact a purposeful murder, you would have had all the answers to those questions before you did that. Just a thought.
How do you think it's going to go for the rest of the day?
Painful. It's like Mr. T, prediction, pain.
Bob, thank you so much for joining us. It was great to have your insight.
Thank you, Jesse.
All right, everybody. So again, we're keeping a very careful eye on the Claude Tex McIver courtroom. Again, a prominent attorney who was charged with the murder of his wife, Diane McIver, and the prosecution is saying that he killed her for financial gain. The witness on the stand right now is Kenneth Rickard, explaining how Tex was really curious about the benefits he could receive after Diane died, but not really showing any remorse. So it becomes a battle between the prosecution and the defense. Was this murder or was this an accident? When we come back, we're going to jump right back into the Leon Jacob case. I want to show you more of his testimony. You do not want to miss it. It was unbelievable to watch. We'll take a quick break. We'll be back in a minute.